Hi, everybody. Ashley Boyd. This is Dawn. Dawn, can you tell us about yourself and what you do?
I'm a professor of cognitive sciences at the University of California at Irvine, and I study visual perception, evolutionary psychology, consciousness, and the mind-body problem.
I think it's amazing. I was like so excited to talk to you on the phone the other day. My husband was totally laughing at me because I'm like, this is great. So, can you kind of tell me, like, go over what we had spoken about the science and intuition, like what your take on it is? I know you said it's not your specialty, but I think that what you have to say is brilliant.
Right. So we all have gut feelings that we've been told sometimes not to trust too much, but it turns out that those gut feelings are very, very smart. Our feelings about whether we think somebody is trustworthy or whether some item might be a fake these turn out to be very, very sophisticated algorithms that are built into our brain. And also things that we do every day, like seeing someone and deciding whether they're trustworthy or even if they're attractive. It turns out even just the feeling of attractiveness is an incredibly sophisticated computation that we don't consciously do. It's billions of neurons and trillions of synapses that are something like a modern deep learning kind of algorithm where they're just taking in tons and tons of information, looking for lots of correlations. And when it finds these correlations and it comes to conclusions, it just tells you the result of that computation in terms of gut feelings that we have. And so I'm not saying our gut feelings are always right, but they're often sometimes they're the most sophisticated things that we do in terms of our computations in the brain.
And so when you say, like, to put in layman's terms for some people, like the synapses, like, is that like how you would say like a little mini computer, like computing things so people can understand like what you mean by that?
That's right. So your brain consists of about 86 billion neurons with trillions of synapses. And we're still in the process of understanding exactly how memories and learning go on in the brain. But one of the big ideas is that somehow changes in the connection strengths between neurons at the so-called synapses seems to be an important part of the whole thing. And so when we build artificial neural networks and have these artificial intelligence systems now that can learn all sorts of amazing things, can learn to drive, can learn to recognize objects and so forth. In many cases, what they're doing is they're changing the connections between the artificial neurons in the artificial neural network. And we think that that's at least part of what's going on in the human brain, is that the brain has these learning algorithms that are fairly general purpose. Some of them are specific. We have specific learning algorithms as well, but there are some general purpose ones that allow us to learn lots of correlations. And because we can't spend our conscious efforts thinking about those computations, our unconscious computations just sort of give us the results in terms of gut feelings that we have. But those are very sophisticated.
And like, it just boggles my mind. So when, say for instance, like obviously unconsciously we're taking in all this information and we're making these decisions, but do you feel like we are able to consciously like learn how to adapt to different ways of using our synapses in a different way?
Well, certainly every time that you learn some new skill, you are doing just that. Mm-hmm. But I guess one important thing is to recognize in many cases that listening to your intuitions, listening to your gut is often a very, very smart thing to do. And not necessarily take it for granted that it's always right, but not to dismiss our gut. Mm-hmm. There's been some interesting studies, for example, just controlled studies with people where there's two decks of cards. One deck of card, you tend, if you pull from there, you tend to get higher payoffs, and the other deck of cards, they set it up so you're getting lower payoffs. Mm-hmm. And they just have people start choosing from the decks randomly in a game. And it turns out that you can see from the autonomic nervous system, the sweat responses, the heart rate, and so forth, that a person has learned that one deck is bad and one deck is good subconsciously long before they can consciously tell you what's going on. And so, this unconscious computation is already figuring out these correlations in presumably in situations that we were not adapted for. We didn't play card games during the Pleistocene, as far as I know. So it's this fairly general purpose algorithm, and it's already learning the contingencies, the good and bad things in the environment around it, long before you're consciously aware of what's going on.
It's just mind-boggling. I know I keep saying that, but it is, because if it's almost like we exercise, if we acknowledge the gut intuition, it's, I'm sure, sending some other type of signal somewhere to like enhance that more often. Am I going in the right direction with that?
That's right. It's what we call reinforcement learning that's going on there. So in the card example, in some sense, you're learning every time you get a positive card, you're learning a new model about that one deck, that it's a good deck, subconsciously. And every time you get a negative card, you're learning statistically that this other thing is sort of bad. And so it's what we call reinforcement learning. And that seems to be going on all the time. Actually, understanding reinforcement learning is critical to understanding even things like addiction and how addiction happens and how to get out of addiction. It's very, very powerful.
I find that people who are more in tune with using their gut feeling have had some sort of addictive process that they've overcome, because it's almost like a mask of some sort that they're unable to decipher, basically, between the intuition of the overwhelming feelings, and then they go to something else to kind of mask that feeling.
Yes, it certainly can happen. And in some cases of addiction, for example, with cocaine, I mean, it actually goes in and plays with the reinforcement learning system. It turns out that dopamine, which is what's affected by cocaine,
wow,
is when you take cocaine, it actually is a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. Mm-hmm. And so it means that there's more dopamine in the synapses between neurons. And that's actually a signal to your brain that the world is better than you thought. Mm-hmm. And so what you then do is learn that everything, you now look at your environment subconsciously and say, well, all this stuff is actually better than I thought. So all the peripheral, stuff that's going on when you take the cocaine, the friends, the apparatus, the room, and so forth, that the model of all that goes up. And so what happens is you're really playing with a reinforcement learning module that's saying this is much better than I thought. And so that's what's really making the addiction very hard to beat.
That's crazy, because I mean, if you put that in the sense of intuition, it could be the same thing. Like, that's why you can become like an expert at knowing your body. It's because of the release of the different types of drugs in your brain to then trigger more things to occur. Is that like kind of?
Yeah, I think that if someone I think that, yeah, you could, if you get more in tune with your body, you may be, in fact, listening to these ongoing algorithms inside of you that are monitoring, are things well, are things not well, and are coming up with evaluations that this is good, this is bad. And, a lot of us, myself included, were trained really not to pay too much attention to that. But I think that as we actually get in touch with our bodies, again, not to take it as an infallible guide, but certainly it's something to listen to. We can actually be in tune with what might be going on in our bodies in a better way.
Absolutely. Because like, I know that with myself, when I have some sort of energy that isn't okay with myself, like I get flushed, sweaty. I mean, I totally go into fight or flight. And it's like, once I finally realized that was my body telling me something isn't right, I had to figure out how to ask myself what isn't right. But it was just learning my body telling me, hello, something like red flag.
That's right. And so I think that the neuroscience behind this is pretty interesting. It's saying that these gut feelings that we have are not just random. They are intelligent. And in fact, they may be among the most intelligent computations that go on in our brain. And they really do involve billions of neurons and trillions of synapses. And they go on, even in cases where we wouldn't expect them to go on. When you just see a face that's familiar and important, you're a mom or dad or a good friend, it turns out you get an emotional response that can be measured in your heart rate, perspiration and so forth. So this is going on all the time. Part of actually recognizing a person is not just knowing that their face satisfies a certain model of the face that you know, but it's also an emotional recognition that goes on deep inside your body.
Absolutely. This is just crazy. I love this. I wish I could pick your brain for a couple of hours. I appreciate your time and sharing the brief knowledge that you have given us, because I think that it will help so many people understand that it is an actual tangible thing that's occurring in your body, that you can really learn to recognize your own signs and symptoms, to really try to like get yourself to a more homeostatic in your brain, to make you understand your body a little bit more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it turns out from an evolutionary theory, there's a deep logic to all of our emotions. And so we're actually for the first time beginning to understand the logic of our emotions. And of course, those go deep into the physiological responses that we have. And so it turns out again that this is not just random, it's not to be ignored. All the emotions that we have, even though they're often not consistent, they're all doing a very interesting job. So it's actually fun from evolutionary psychology point of view to understand this. We're not consistent, but we're brilliant.
So true. Well, Don, can you let people know how they can contact you if they have questions for you specifically? I want to make sure that I don't want you to get bombarded, because I'm sure tons of people want to ask you questions, but I think that your knowledge is just absolutely amazing.
There's a couple ways. I have a Twitter feed it's Donald D. Hoffman, DONALD DHOFFMAN. So at Donald D. Hoffman. I have an email, ddhoff@uci.edu. And I also have a homepage if people want to see some of my papers and so forth.
Yeah.
My web, if you just Google Donald Hoffman, HOFFMAN, homepage, I think mine is the first that comes up. And I have a link to my Vita with all my papers and podcasts and videos.
Awesome. I will definitely, I'll put that in the email as well, so people can definitely just click to see you, because I think it's super important. The information that you have is just absolutely brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Okay.